would see coming, families, watching from the edges, tried to shield their own from mistakes. But even love had limits in a city built on power and survival. Mentors appeared, some willing and some with hidden agendas. Their guidance was often cryptic, teaching lessons through challenges rather than words. Every handshake, every nod, and every casual conversation held meaning. The ambitious learned to read between lines, to sense motives, and to predict moves before they happened. Alliances formed cautiously, often tested immediately. Loyalty was rarely given freely. It had to be earned. Rivalries, once begun, festered quickly, turning even the smallest insult into long-lasting conflicts. People discovered that respect could be cultivated through clever strategy, rather than brute strength. That fear could be both a tool and a trap. Night after night, the city taught lessons about courage, cunning, and control. The ambitious started seeing patterns: who controlled resources, who influenced decisions, who had sway over information. They realized that power often came from unseen sources, from control of knowledge rather than weapons. The young studied these lessons carefully, practicing subtlety and restraint, learning to make each interaction count. Even in moments of rest, the mind never stopped. Dreams were filled with strategies, plans, and outcomes. Every choice, no matter how minor, was analyzed, replayed, and sometimes rewritten in thought. The ambitious knew the stakes were high. Every move created consequences, and every hesitation could be fatal. The streets taught that luck alone was never enough. Awareness, timing, and adaptability were everything. As the city's pulse quickened with approaching dawn, the ambitious began to make moves that would define their paths. Some started small, testing loyalties and observing reactions. Others made bolder steps, taking risks to secure influence or access. In these early actions, hints of future power struggles emerged, the seeds of rivalries that could last a lifetime. Families felt the tension as young hearts and minds were drawn deeper into the game of power. They saw ambition ignite, and with it, the inevitable mistakes that came with learning too quickly or trusting too easily. Yet, ambition was irresistible. The promise of influence, money, and respect drew people forward, forcing them to act even when fear warned against it. The nights became a classroom where survival, cunning, and judgment were taught with every encounter. By the time the first light touched the rooftops, the ambitious had tested themselves in ways that would shape the rest of their lives. Alliances had been quietly formed, boundaries silently established, and reputations quietly cemented. Each player understood that power was never a gift. It was claimed, negotiated, and maintained with precision. And though the city offered lessons in abundance, it demanded one thing above all: vigilance. A single distraction, a misread signal, or an underestimation of a rival could undo months of effort in an instant. The ambitious learned to move like shadows, to speak like whispers, and to think like chess masters. In these hours before the day fully began, they discovered that survival and influence were inseparable, that the smallest actions could trigger the largest consequences, and that the path to power was always defined by the choices made in silence. When no one was watching, and when the city itself seemed to hold its breath as the city moved from night into day, the streets became alive with purpose, each corner and alley holding energy that demanded attention. The ambitious could feel it. The rhythm of the city quickened. The patterns became sharper, and every subtle movement carried meaning. It was in these moments that the first true tests of character appeared. Those who had been careful now had to act. Opportunities were no longer whispers in the shadows. They were visible to those willing to see and brave enough to take them. Small victories from the night could now be expanded, alliances strengthened, and influence quietly solidified. The ambitious began to understand that power was a collection of small steps, each building upon the last, forming a foundation strong enough to hold even when the ground shook beneath them. Those who hesitated risked being swept aside by those who saw clearly, moved decisively, and calculated risk with precision. In the city, reputation became currency. A glance could elevate a person. A whispered rumor could destroy them. Each interaction, each word, each gesture carried weight. Families watched, often in silence, as their young ones tested boundaries, learning the hard truths that survival demanded. Loyalty could be bought, trust could be exploited, and courage alone was never enough. Mentors offered guidance, but the lessons were never given freely. They had to be earned through observation, judgment, and action. Early mistakes became the hardest teachers, revealing vulnerabilities and weaknesses that could not be ignored. Yet, even in the face of risk, ambition thrived. Dreams of power, wealth, and respect pushed individuals forward, compelling them to take risks others would avoid. The streets were a chessboard, and the ambitious were learning to move each piece carefully, always anticipating counterplays, watching for openings, and never underestimating the opposition. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. Rivalries that had begun as minor disagreements or misunderstandings were now showing the potential to escalate. Alliances, carefully constructed, were tested by temptation, jealousy, and ambition. Every decision became a balance between immediate gain and long-term consequence, and those who could not navigate this balance were left behind. Opportunities appeared in unexpected ways. A misstep by a rival, an unguarded secret, a chance encounter in the streets. Those paying attention seized these moments, knowing that timing often mattered more than strength or luck. Trust, when earned, became a tool. Suspicion, when used wisely, became a weapon. The city itself seemed to breathe, responding to the ambitions, fears, and desires of those within it. The young learned that influence was rarely declared, it was observed, measured, and slowly established through calculated presence and decisive action. Ambition was a constant companion, urging the cautious to move faster and the bold to move smarter. The lessons of survival became intertwined with lessons of strategy. How to negotiate without appearing desperate, how to assert power without revealing vulnerability, and how to read intentions hidden behind casual gestures and friendly words. Each day built upon the lessons of the night before, reinforcing the understanding that power was not simply about force or wealth, it was about vision, patience, and relentless attention to the currents that ran beneath the surface of the city. By midday, the city had become a stage of silent battles, unseen maneuvers, and subtle victories. Every figure, every group, every whisper contributed to the complex web of influence and ambition. Those who had studied, observed, and adapted moved through the city with confidence, taking measured risks that others would never dare. And as the sun climbed higher, the ambitious realized that this was only the beginning. Each decision they made today would shape opportunities tomorrow. Rivalries would intensify, and the first sparks of legendary confrontations were already forming in silence. The city demanded vigilance, intelligence, and resilience. For those who could master these lessons, the path to influence and power became clearer. But for those who faltered, even slightly, the consequences could be immediate and unforgiving. The ambitious pressed forward, understanding that the streets were both teacher and battlefield, offering rewards only to those who combined courage with strategy, patience with action, and observation with intuition. In this crucible, characters were forged, alliances, rivalries, and legacies were quietly established. And while the city continued to hum with life, the ambitious understood that the true game was only beginning. Every glance, every gesture, every small act would echo far beyond its moment, shaping the rise of empires, the fall of rivals, and the story that would become power origins. By now, the city was no longer just a backdrop. It had become a teacher, a test, and a silent observer of every choice. The streets, the alleys, the night corners, and even the quiet daytime cafes were full of lessons for those who paid attention. Ambition had begun to sharpen itself in the minds of the young, shaping decisions, guiding steps, and revealing who would act with courage and who would falter. Mistakes made in the early hours now began to show consequences. A slight misjudgment could turn a small opportunity into a dangerous trap. And an overlooked gesture could reveal weaknesses to those waiting for the perfect moment. It was here, in these small, almost invisible details, that true power began to reveal itself. The ambitious understood that patience and observation were as valuable as action and strength. In quiet moments, hidden from the prying eyes of the city, strategies were discussed, alliances negotiated, and rivalries carefully plotted. Words were chosen like weapons, gestures carried meaning far beyond their appearance. Trust, earned carefully, became a tool. But even trust was rarely absolute. Every alliance was tested subtly by challenges or temptations. And every misstep, no matter how small, was an opportunity for rivals to gain the upper hand. Young minds were learning that influence came from a combination of timing, knowledge, and presence. A glance across a room, a nod in the right direction, or a decision to step back could have ripple effects that no one would immediately notice but would be felt later, sometimes before the bright lights of the city glimmered over skyscrapers. The streets were raw, unpolished, and full of whispers. Every corner told a story, every alley held a secret, and every sound the clatter of distant footsteps, the hum of a late night car, the faint echo of laughter hinted at lives about to collide. In these streets, survival wasn't a choice. It was a rule written in the rhythm of the city itself. People learned quickly that trust was fragile. Money could appear and vanish in an instant, and loyalty was rare, almost mythical. Families were the first battlegrounds, where love and loyalty clashed with ambition and fear. Young men and women grew up watching the powerful make decisions that shaped neighborhoods, witnessing deals done in shadows and listening to promises whispered in back rooms. These early days were not about glamour or fame. They were about understanding the rules of power, recognizing danger in every interaction, and learning when to act and when to wait. Every small victory was a lesson, every setback a warning. There were alliances formed over shared dreams, and friendships shattered over misunderstandings or greed. Money circulated, but not always legally. Streets were lined with hustlers, street vendors, and kids with dreams bigger than their shoes. The city was alive in a way that demanded attention, teaching that nothing was free, and everything came with a price. People who thrived here weren't the strongest or the smartest, they were the observant, the patient, the ones who could read silence as easily as they could read words. Every glance could be a threat. Every smile could hide a plan, and every door could lead to opportunity or disaster. The air itself carried tension, a constant reminder that life moved fast and that hesitation could be fatal. Families tried to shield the young, but even in safety, the city crept in with lessons of survival and ambition. Young hearts were drawn to danger, drawn to the excitement of power, the thrill of testing limits, and the pull of money. Even the smallest decisions mattered. Choosing a friend, stepping into a building, walking past a group of strangers. Each choice created ripples that could lift someone to influence or bury them under consequences. The nights were long, often quiet, yet never peaceful. The hum of neon lights, the soft patter of rain on asphalt, the distant echo of sirens, all of it was part of a rhythm, part of a story. The people on these streets learned to move with that rhythm, to understand it, and to respect it. Some were born into struggle, some stumbled into it, and some sought it out intentionally. Each had a reason, each had a dream, but all shared one understanding. Power was not given. It was taken, piece by piece, moment by moment. And in this world, nothing happened overnight. Legends weren't made in a day, they were crafted slowly, carefully, often in shadows where no one was watching. Those who survived learned that the first rule of power was patience. The second was awareness. And the third was knowing when to strike and when to disappear. Before anyone could rise, they had to see clearly, think sharply, and act decisively. This was a world where every whisper carried weight, every glance told a story, and every choice could change a life. And as the streets of the city hummed and pulsed with life, the seeds of ambition were planted, the first alliances were made, and the stage was quietly set for the events that would shape a legacy unlike any other. Here, in these streets, the future was being written one decision at a time, and the players were readying themselves for a game far larger than anyone could yet imagine. The streets had its own heartbeat, a rhythm that everyone learned to follow if they wanted to survive. In the shadows of low-lit alleyways and behind closed doors, the city whispered its lessons. It wasn't about who had the most muscle or the loudest voice. It was about timing, observation, and knowing when to bend without breaking. Some nights, the air was thick with tension, carrying the scent of rain on concrete mixed with smoke from distant fires. The city itself seeming alive, watching, judging. Children grew up fast here, understanding before they even realized that the world was rarely fair. Small victories were celebrated quietly, a successfully completed deal, a warning delivered without violence, a debt collected without a fight. And yet, every victory came with risk, a reminder that nothing remained unchallenged for long. Every figure in the streets was a story, some desperate, some calculated, some daring enough to gamble everything on instinct. Families taught lessons in survival, but the streets offered lessons no one could teach. A glance could reveal loyalty or betrayal. A whispered word could be a warning or a trap. The city tested everyone, and only those who learned to read it properly would endure. Young men and women began to see the patterns, recognizing the movements that led to success and the ones that led to ruin. They observed the adults who ruled corners and neighborhoods, noticing how some built respect through fear, while others built it through strategy. In these lessons, subtlety became a weapon, silence a shield, and patience a form of power. It was not uncommon to see someone rise from obscurity in a single bold move. Yet it was even more common to see someone fall just as quickly, because they misread the signals around them. The city had no favorites. Every decision, every step, every glance carried consequence. Families tried to protect their own, but the pull of ambition was strong, drawing young hearts toward risk, toward challenges, toward moments that could define their lives. Nights were long, stretching into early mornings, but they held stories of courage, failure, and ambition. A young person learning the ropes could witness a confrontation between rivals and understand lessons about fear, strategy, and reputation, all in a single exchange. Every alley had a lesson, every street corner a story, and every movement through the city became practice for survival. The world of power didn't wait for anyone. It demanded that you adapt or be left behind. Some found mentors figures who offered guidance, subtle hints, and sometimes protection. Others relied solely on instincts, learning quickly that mistakes could be costly. Money moved fast and disappeared faster. Deals could crumble in seconds, alliances could shift overnight, and those who didn't anticipate change found themselves on the losing side. Yet, for all the danger, there was opportunity. Every risk carried the possibility of reward. Every shadow could hide a chance to climb higher, to claim influence, or to assert dominance. Those who saw beyond the immediate struggle, who could think 3 steps ahead, often became the players everyone else watched and feared. The city was a classroom without walls, filled with lessons no one could ignore. As some honed skills in strategy and persuasion, others tested boundaries, exploring the limits of loyalty, fear, and desire. The young learned early that power was a currency as valuable as money, sometimes more so, and that reputation could be both fragile and unstoppable depending on how carefully it was managed. Nights brought reflection, strategy, and sometimes regret, but the mornings demanded action. Survival was not guaranteed, and ambition demanded sacrifice. Friendships were fragile, rivalries intense, and the line between right and wrong blurred. Constantly, in this environment, the seeds of larger conflicts were sown. Rivalries born over small matters could escalate into battles. That changed the landscape of influence. Every decision, no matter how small, carried a ripple effect, shaping future choices and defining who would rise and who would fall. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the city, the players were already moving, planning, watching, learning, and preparing. Power was not given. It was earned, fought for, and carefully maintained. Those who understood this early found themselves on paths that could lead to incredible success or devastating failure. And as the city awakened, the lessons of the night lingered, shaping minds, forging ambitions, and preparing the young for the journey that would eventually lead them into the world of kings, empires, and the legacies that would define their lives. Every glance, every choice, every secret kept in shadow mattered, for in this world, the smallest misstep could change everything. The city never truly slept. Even when the streets seemed quiet, there was movement, silent, careful, and calculated. Shadows slipped between buildings, doors opened and closed with measured precision, and whispers traveled faster than footsteps. This was a world where people learned to observe more than they spoke, where attention to detail could be the difference between survival and disaster. In the quiet hours, the ambitious studied the patterns of those around them. They watched who bowed to whom, who spoke when, and who acted before thinking. In these moments, power revealed itself in subtle ways. A nod from the right person, a door opened at the right time, a silence that spoke louder than words. Young people dreaming of influence began to test themselves. They ran small errands, negotiated minor deals, and tested the limits of trust. Each action, no matter how insignificant it seemed, taught lessons about patience, risk, and the weight of choices. A single misstep could ruin a reputation, but a single smart move could begin a chain of opportunities that no one,